Testing, testing, testing. Here we are again, folks, to talk a little bit more about imperialism for lesson 11b, and we're going to look specifically this time at imperialism in India and in Latin America, so a little bit south of our border and also in the subcontinent of India, and finish up our thoughts about imperialism around the world. The reading for this particular section is going to be Imperialism in Asia and Africa, and it's pages 666 to 677. So if you'd go ahead and take a look at that in your book, you will finish up chapter 21. And you'll find a few more terms in that section. One is nonviolent resistance, another is Creole, and the third is Monroe Doctrine. So see if you can get an idea of what those terms might mean, because you're going to see them on your assessment. So, continuing with our discussion of imperialism, we remember imperialism is the idea of European nations taking over other parts of the world for either strategic, religious, or just basically bragging rights. And certainly two areas that were critical in this time frame were India and also Latin America. So we're going to start off looking at the Indian subcontinent, and generally we're talking about the British. The British took over much of this area and held it all the way up into the mid-1900s. So the British controlled interest in India through a company. It really was not the British government at first. It was through a company sponsored by the British government called the East Indian Company. And for a long time it was a opportunity to trade back and forth. So it was more economic than governmental. But that was going to change fairly soon. In 1857, there was a large misunderstanding dealing with some soldiers known as sepoys, who were controlled by the British, and these sepoys revolted against the British due to a religious misunderstanding that involved the fact that they were Hindus and the British rulers were asking them to do something they didn't want to do. And so as a result, the British Parliament transferred control of India directly to the British government. So instead of having this kind of quasi-economic and trade relationship, the British decided to take over India as a governmental colony. So what did that look like, British control in India? Well, they ruled directly through a viceroy. That was kind of the person that ran the entire country, the viceroy of India, for the British government, and through civil servants, so bureaucracy, people that worked for the viceroy. They were British citizens. They came over from England, and they ran the country, essentially. The British set up a school system and developed infrastructure to look exactly like it would have in London. So a little piece of England, or actually because of India's size, a big piece of England right there in Asia. This led to peace and stability, but it came at a fairly significant price, and that was the religion, the freedoms and rights of the Indian people. So while there was some peace and stability under the British rule, certainly the Indian people did not have their own rights. And that lasted for a long time until the early 1900s, when Indians, just like Africans and other Asians, started to think about their place in the world and desired to have some sort of rule on their own. And so they developed this idea of nationalism. It was centered around both a cultural and a religious background. And the Indian nationalists wanted to reform the British system. They wanted to have the British more respectful of their needs and their beliefs. And because the British resisted this, they refused to do this. Eventually, the Indian nationalists pushed for the complete ouster or removal of the British. So from wanting to reform the British rule to essentially wanting to push the rule out completely, the British out completely. And the leader is a gentleman that you probably have heard of before. He's pictured on the right-hand side of the slide, and that is Mohandas Gandhi. Is the leader. He's a lawyer. He initially comes from South Africa. He's an Indian that lived in South Africa, comes back to India, and pushes for Indian nationalism. And what's critical about this resistance movement is Gandhi is a proponent of what's called nonviolent resistance, the idea that we can't violently overthrow the British. They're just too powerful. So we're going to use nonviolent resistance and try to get the will of the world against the British. And so Gandhi, over many, many years, utilizes this particular strategy and eventually finds great success and eventually Indian independence in 1947. If we go across the ocean to Latin America, we're going to see that there were similar things going on related to revolts and nationalist movements against the imperial European nations. One of the very first was in Haiti. And the third bullet on this slide talks a little bit about this. This is the individual pictured on this slide. And that is Toussaint Louverture leads a slave revolt of black Haitian slaves against the French and kicks the French out in the early 1800s. And it's one of the very first uprisings that's successful of the oppressed versus the imperialist people. The ideals of the American Revolution really start to push Latin American people to think about these. You know, the Americans cast off the British and developed their own country, the United States, so other parts of Latin America want to follow through. People in Mexico, Bolivia, revolt against their colonial masters, and as I said, eventually in the early 1800s, we see this happening successfully in Haiti as well. We eventually see some political change in Latin America. Part of this is due to the fact that the United States, desiring to kind of keep North and South America under its own control, issues something called the Monroe Doctrine, named after President Monroe. This essentially says that European nations are not welcome to become colonial rulers in Latin America. It essentially says you are going to have to keep out of North and South America and leave that to us. The United States also makes effort to keep friendly leaders in power in Latin America. So leaders that are friendly to the United States get support from the U.S. either monetarily or militarily and are kept in power. However, in Mexico, we actually see a uprising by Zapata and his revolutionaries that overthrow. It's a peasant group, people that are generally lower on the socioeconomic platform. They overthrow the Mexican government in 1920 and set up the Mexican Republic. So we see that we're having similar things happening around the world to the imperialist masters, and this is going to kind of lead us into some major changes that are going to happen very soon related to the two world wars, which shake up the balance of power and a little bit about the map, and eventually lead to the consolidation of power by countries being ruled by their own people. So we'll see that more next time. For now, though, go ahead and take a look at the reading for this particular section, and then go ahead and do assignment 11b. We'll talk to you next time.